I have some questions that are questions from the whole days and that were asked and we couldn't answer so far. Maybe you just take a seat here. And I want to discuss these questions with you and then with you all. And if you have any other questions that I didn't ask so far, just raise your hand. Okay, that's the deal. The first question, Martin and Hille, was, I think, 3 times here. What is a good question and how do I find the right question if I want to start a design process? So I think this was a question everybody, or at least 3 persons asked. Maybe you should just give us some reasoning about this, and maybe Antje can give some answers too. But first, maybe you two, as you started this process here. Martin.
Thank you for asking such a difficult question. But and I don't want to be too academic here, but of course, when you start any research, the basic issue is the research question, and I'm only happy if I really don't know an answer. If I have no clue, then I think it's a good question. And it takes quite long to get to such a question, in my view.
Where do you search for this question? In your head? So in your, do you search for this question in your thoughts, or do you organize collaborative processes to find these questions who are relevant?
Well, I think what we did here is a way to find a good question. You know, when you start out and you look with an open mind on what we call Raumgeschehen, or at the world, and then you really engage in it, for example, walk in it, but really engage in it, and be curious, and you find all kinds of involving it. You find all kinds of questions, and I think everybody did on their walks, on their what they did in this specific question area of urban landscapes in a city of this size, with making a city development process in the background. But then, and I remind what Helga Novotny says, then you have maybe subjective and reason, oh, that's a good question. It's a really good question. It's interesting because you have this nice feeling, this creative feeling. I found something. Boah, that's interesting. But then the next step is to say, to show it, to say, and then go in the dialogue with your colleagues, with the knowledge, with really looking up, is it really a good question? But the first step is to be courageous and say, what I found out, okay, I tested.
Is this a process of art, or is it a process of science?
It's both.
It's both. Okay.
I think we all do that.
I have a question. I have a question for. I have a question for Antje now. Antje, where do you get your good questions from your real labor from? You get them from politics, isn't it, or do you ask in yourself?
Yeah, it's not actually simply politics. There are pressing issues that are being discussed in politics. They are reflected in newspapers. There are actual debates that are held in the society, and there's also personal experiences, of course, of like living in exactly this city and experiencing daily activities, experiencing space, and kind of linking all that together, and then engaging in storytelling, in talking to different people. I mean, you have to take a position at one time, because if you feel, okay, this is much debated, and Martin just said, I need to find a new question, but still it needs to be linked with something that is a pressing, actual issue. But it has to be framed in such a way that it is still new, and that it is finding a point where you feel nobody has asked that specific one yet, although it's so obvious because it's still linked with all the interest, and this is like the challenging part then, how then to go so deep that you put as your recommendation for the research to find new terms for hybrids that do not yet exist. I mean, this is what we are also asking you when we ask you to find a new name for your exhibit or the situation, to come up with just a new perspective that then suddenly starts framing your research in a new way that nobody has thought of before, even although the topic might not seem that new in the beginning. And I think that's the challenge, to find a new, very challenging question within a theme that still is of importance and really societal discourse already, in order to link it. Because if it's like completely innovative and new, nobody can understand what you're talking about, then it's also not a good question.
Dirk, I have the question: is every new question good for new answers, that gives answers to the questions you raise? So is it always necessary to have new questions to get the answers that will heal the world?
No, I'm not sure. It can also be an assemblage of things you find. For instance, in the Istanbul proposal we did, it is based on the observation that the real estate developers of Istanbul, the water guys and the people from the agricultural department haven't talked to each other for 30 years. And then staging a process where these three main actors come together, sort of the question emerged from that almost at the same time as the answer, as the possible answer emerged. So it is not, let's say, sitting down and being in the reflective mode, trying to think up a question. It is more complex than that.
So this is the last question about questions. Christian, is it important that the researchers formulate the question, or could it be that it is more important for changing processes that practitioners are formulating the questions with researchers? So, as you said, it is more like a researcher project. I will find a question. Maybe I misunderstood. We can discuss about this. So, who has to formulate the question to get the right answers?
It's very difficult to be general about that.
Can you find an example?
In an ideal process, the researcher would also be a practitioner. So there's no answer. It could be the researcher to ask the question, it could be the practitioner. I think it's more important just to think about the question. Right? It's not the answer, it's the question that makes us think. The way I can answer for myself, the way I think is I ask myself questions, and that's the way I communicate with myself. And my favorite question comes up all over the years, always in my notebooks. It's was tun, so what to do. So, and sometimes I know an answer, sometimes very often I don't know, and I keep thinking about that. And what makes a good question for me is an interesting one. So somebody needs to be interested in a good question. So at least the researcher needs to be interested in that. Because in the end, you spend a lot of time, funds, energy, your lifetime. And if it doesn't interest you, you will never do that, right?
So maybe some closing remarks on the question, Hille. You said it's not an individual process?
No, it can be an individual one, but it can be a cooperative thing too. Or it can be a mixture, like when we work in the studio Urbane Landschaften on finding a new question, we often go as a team, and then everybody on his or her own does something like we did here, and comes, for example, back with one question, maybe very enthusiastic or not, and then we put these questions or ideas on the table, and then we talk about it or make sketches, and then it becomes quite a different question maybe, or maybe one is chosen. So it then becomes a team thing. Mm-hmm. But I suppose it differs from person to person. For me, it's like, I think you said about your journal. I'm always walking around with this book, and I always have sketches and little notices and questions, and every once in a while they come like this with other people and with a possibility. That's a thing okay. Too, and then, okay, that's the question.
So there's a question to the question. Is there a microphone somewhere? Yeah. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I would be very interested in, after having gone through a lot of interesting experiences and having talked to a lot of interesting people, what actually was the question behind organizing the whole event by our great hosts here in Hanover? I'm extremely curious about that question.
Okay, thank you very much. Martin, Hille?
Did I start? Well, we had actually, I think, maybe 3 things that were important. The first thing is we had the feeling and the experience that our approach should be presented to a broader audience, a public audience. That was the first thing. The second thing was we wanted to, and how could we do that? And we said we had to do that with an experiment with engaging people, so that's why the format came like this. The second one was that we wanted to present or to bring our approach more in context with science, because we have been talking about it a lot, how difficult that is. So we said, well, okay, we need a format which combines science practice. So that's why we did it this way. And of course, we were curious about trying out what we have been doing such a lot of times in a very different format with a lot of people, and in a very new way of doing it with 100 people at once.
Mm-hmm. Okay, Martin, anything else?
My first slide in my presentation was the aim of our conference, to explore new pathways in design research, and the aim is kind of always the indirect phrasing of the question. Are there new pathways in design research? And I think we also had a sub-question in that. What different or new types of design research can we conceive with this audience, with this participants here in a shared experience? And, well, I'm not far enough to give an answer to that now.
Mm-hmm. Okay, if there's not any question at the moment, I have another topic to discuss. Christian Ganshirt gave me this sentence, I think he was it, and he said, wait a second, wait. So he said, actually, research is based on reasons, and pure design is more based on power. So this is not what you said, but there is. Excuse me, I'm trying. I'm not quoting you, Christian. I'm just saying it. Okay, I'm just saying it. So, but when I heard Antje's speech, and there was this mixture of kind of researching process, and there's the state of power who wants to have answers, and I have to ask the question. How do you work on this in your Reallabor, on these two sides of the role of university? What is the role there? Because you have this minister president or whoever asks you questions, good questions maybe, but this is going to lead you in a direction of researching. And normally this is not the job of universities. Normally this job is done somewhere outside, and where the client is clear and where the designer is clear. So maybe you could just think about this.
Well, to my opinion, the universities are a perfect catalyst, because they take, like in the beginning, really a neutral position in these debates. And it's not that we are being asked by the minister to research a specific question. The question is not given; it's completely open. We find our own question, we find the stakeholders we want to work with, and we are not obliged to anybody. We don't need to fulfill the political agendas. We can question them as well as we can decide who we want to work with. And even the municipality, who have an action program on sustainable mobility, they said for some Realexperimente, we might be much more suitable to act as catalyzers for new ideas, because for them it's already biased. It's a project by the city or it's a project by that specific organization, whereas we cooperate with many stakeholders, and it's for us to come up with a research framework that gains a lot of trust, because we are not already associated with any specific partner and not with a specific topic. So we can kind of do this, what we did upstairs, the meshing. That's our job. We need to find these connections, we need to link partners, we need to, and also, as you said, what you did in Istanbul, to bring together partners who would never come to a meeting in the city hall if the city introduces a new program or something. And we have this, we are in the position to be working as facilitators in this process, and also to define these kind of questions together with the people. And I think that's quite a great role, and especially also for students to be involved with this process, because they get in touch with the real actors and the real projects.
Okay, thank you very much. Then I have a question to Martin or to Hille. This mesh-up process. This is so that we get the different positions that we saw in the hall, in the big hall, that you get them together somehow, that you can transmit the experiences to third ones. As Rainer Nagel said, for example, so I have 4 works that where I can find a link, but the rest for me is not linked. So how could this process of transmitting the different positions to a meshed up and readable research thing, how could this process be designed more clearly maybe? Designed or... excuse me, but the questions are not easy. Your conference is not easy.
That's why he gives the microphone to me.
So, but you know what I mean? So the boxes were standing there, and you had the feeling that there were many individuals working on their boxes. But the process of meshing it up to make something new, maybe it didn't happen yet.
No.
Okay.
That really would be, it's not always, but in this case, it would be the next step. Sometimes it happens in one step. But when the next step would be to look closer what is on the different stools there, what are the ideas, what are the questions, and to kind of analyze, put them together, those are similar, those are different, this is interesting, is that interesting too? Like starting really a process of negotiating and finding what linkages are there. And they don't have to be all linked, of course, because there might be someone say, oh, well, that's an interesting thing just to start, for example, with an experiment. And it's not linked, maybe it's a question which needs to be clearer, and you have to do something with it. So this is a really process following of working with these objects is not right, but this with the material we have. And you can do that. We have it done in projects first really bodily. This has that it means putting it together and looking at it. Look, what does it look like? So in a very bodily way. Of course, in an intellectual way, you make descriptions, and you say, well, we have to look deeper in that question. So that's really the process that is following this one, what we did. And I sketched, when you remember, the spiral of iterative process. So we go through this process again and again. And it's not, when we once do it rational, it's not finished.
Martin.
Well, this is really the challenge of producing transferable knowledge. Sometimes in this symposium I thought maybe this term has become old-fashioned, but it's probably not. And it's a shared issue, and we all have to do it together in a way. And I would like to remind you again on this little paper, because this will help us for our reflection, and we should maybe, we would make it public, and it will also be very open, because we hope that all of you have taken something with you to continue, and you will bring it into your own network, so there it will also grow, hopefully. But this is fortunately not controllable. It's uncertain and complex and exciting, therefore.
Let's talk about uncertainty. Martin, you have to answer now. So uncertainty in planning processes that, or design processes that deal with real life, where there are politicians or whoever who have to finance it and to be responsible for these kinds of processes. What is your experience with other processes you designed? Is it easier to deal with uncertainty in such open question-finding ways you presented here? So is it a better way to deal with uncertainty, or makes it people even more uncertain about what to do?
No, you have to offer open suggestions, and this is actually the big asset of design, that you propose possibilities and not solutions. I sometimes felt a little bit overwhelmed by, if you always talk about problem and solution, which is really not so interesting, I think, but it's more interesting to talk about the possibilities, which have to deal with uncertainty. But you can frame uncertainty in a way, and then you can choose. Solutions are potentially boring.
In my experience, this approach really makes it easier to deal with uncertainty. And you could very well see that in Antje's speech, it needs this enthusiasm. Even if everybody says, ooh, uncertain, you have to have this enthusiasm, this love for the subject, this engagement. And then the possibility of the research where you really, for the researching, designing, where you use your intuition and you use your rationality and you are able to deal with this uncertainty. I think it works really better. And I have a long experience as a planner and as an architect, and I really feel that it works better with this approach than it did when I used to do master planning.
Okay. So, Dirk and Antje, I would be interested in the topic of dynamics in this kinds of processes, because uncertainty and slowness could be a catastrophe. This is my experience. So if you have uncertain processes and not enough energy, driven energy in it, so maybe how about dynamics in this kind of processes? Do they have to have an end, or can they be just open everywhere? And do you put them, or do you design them as a festival, or like a never-ending open process?
Well, in a way, in that way, space is a temporal conception. Like asphalt is still fluid. It's always just a stage where the landscape is in. It will change by your design or without your design, or etc., etc. So the dynamics of having to deal with all these uncertainties are also like asking the right questions, is also looking at the right elements in space that are or might be strong enough to act as an engine to, let's say, draw all the other elements of space a little bit further. So it is also looking at strengths of actors, of politics, of possible land use that are programmatic, on the move. So you have to sort of navigate yourself in a way through all these possible processes. It's almost like the Jules Verne Captain Nemo of the Nautilus. He had this fantastic motto, mobilis in mobili. It's moving into the moving medium, and that's what we have to learn, I think.
May I add something?
Of course, you are always entering a dynamic process, which is very complex, and it's about also we heard about the simple rules that you identify certain aspects, certain parameters, certain agents of change by whom you can then have an influence on the system to steer the dynamic by a simple intervention into a different way, and then you let go again, and then you see what happens. It's not like controlling, you never control a process, but you are kind of shaping for the dynamics to simply in a different direction for some aspects, and then observe what happens then, and it's like small and identifying these specific points in the network that can create this thing to happen. And the dynamics, that's the interesting thing. It's like surfing. You just catch the next wave. It's a dynamic system, and you need to just enjoy that you cannot foresee everything, and you just find the next wave and catch it, and that's it. That's fun.
Okay, thank you very much. Seems to be that this kind of process has something to do with water. Hille wants to say something, and I want to offer you the podium too. So if you have any open questions that are as complicated as mine or less complicated, please ask. Hille.
Well, I just wanted to say, of course, you need what you might call system knowledge. Like Niels was saying the other day, you have, in order to take the next wave, you have to know a lot about water and being able to taking it. So you have, for example, to know a lot about political systems when you are in these big processes. And it's fun if you find the wave, but sometimes, as we all know, it's not easy. And you have really to know these systems, and what you have to know what is called systemic, is it in English? Systemic too. Oh. So the way they are interacting, so the systems and the way they are interacting, and finding how does this process go in order to really find your wave.
And you have to have a lot of muscles to jump on the board when the wave comes. So that means you have to be able to take the wave somehow. Yeah, nice picture. Thank you, Antje. So I would be interested, I think it was you, was the name, who referred today about the pragmatic learning cycle, was it? And what I would like to know, if you could give us just some open thoughts on who could the learning process in universities be that there is more such kind of design research than it is now. So what has to be learned that that we all get used to this kind of research processes?
It's a very difficult question, again, because things, in my impression, are getting a bit fuzzy right now. Well, I think I come back to the issue of terminologies, of being able to communicate in academia, in the university. This is our biggest task, I think. Formulating research questions, and I make a difference between design questions and research questions, formulating research questions that are interesting for the other faculties, for the sociologists, for the psychologists, for example. And if we use our methods and we produce results that are really new for the other disciplines, this would be a success criteria for me. If we don't find out what they already know, but show them that our methods produce new contributions to questions that they are also interested in. Does this help a little bit?
Thank you very much. I mean, difficult question, a very good, precise answer. So to to show something that others want. And maybe what I learned in this short hours is the thing I felt that you know better than some other researchers or practitioners is to deal with complexity. And I think this is one thing politics really need, not to get to solutions, but to get the things fluid. Some of these locked-in effects that Seggern Novotny talked about, I think they occur because these locked-in situations, because people can't deal with this kind of complexity anymore, and they don't even see the wave to jump on. So maybe 2 years. In 2 years, I come back and you show pictures that makes me convince me, people like me or like Uwe Bodemann, that this is the right way to solve some things. So, any other questions? Any other contributions? Otherwise, if it's okay for you, I would say thank you to you all. Thank you to all the speakers for these interesting 4 inputs. This was a real big thing for me. I heard a lot of new things, and thank you for you both for organizing all this with Studio Urbane Landschaften. I think you should have the word now. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Frauke, for this wonderful moderation. I have the impression that we are all in what Henrik called in his walking PhD the flow mode, where we are so exhausted. Rational thoughts are impossible anymore, but probably a very productive phase, as we know. So keep flowing.